Racist cop gets life sentence for aiming gun at black general during son's funeral. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's a reckoning. A decorated general, a grieving mother kneeling at her only son's grave, a police officer with a twitchy finger and a badge too heavy for his soul, 20 armed cops watching, not blinking, and in the middle of it all, a gun pressed against her temple, a whisper, not today a single shot. No, this isn't fiction. This happened here in America, and what followed shattered careers, exposed conspiracies, and dragged an invisible brotherhood into the unforgiving daylight. Stick around, because by the end of this story, you'll question everything you thought you knew about justice power and what it really means to serve this country. And no, the ending isn't what you think. Eliza Brooks was a woman of iron, 46 years old, 3 decades in the U.S. Army, and now the highest-ranking black female general in the country. But none of her stars, stripes, or citations had prepared her for this. Bearing her only son, her name alone commanded respect at the Pentagon General. Brooks was whispered in briefing rooms, printed in policy memos, feared in after-hours war rooms. She had survived wars, outlasted politics, broken barriers so thick they cracked under the weight of her silence. But on that April afternoon, as her plane descended over Houston, she was just Eliza, just a mother. One headed home to bury Captain Malik Brooks, her son, her pride, her heart. Malik had died in Afghanistan. That was the headline, but headlines lie. The official report said combat fatality during classified operations. No explanation, no closure. Just one neatly folded flag in a death too convenient for someone who'd been asking too many questions about race power and institutional loyalty. The plane landed. Eliza adjusted her uniform with muscle memory. For 30 years, that uniform had been her armor. Today, it felt like paper. At the gate, strangers stared, not with judgment but reverence. A little girl pointed. "Is she famous?" she asked her mom. "She's more than that," the mother whispered. "She's a real American hero." For a fleeting second, Eliza smiled. A moment of dignity, brief as a salute. But America always has a way of reminding black excellence where the exit sign is. She walked into Houston International, credentials ready, grief held tightly beneath her medals. She approached security, expecting a routine. Instead, she got an Officer Craig Milner, 5, white, stocky, with eyes like frosted glass, in a voice that came standard with suspicion. "Random enhanced screening," he said without looking up. "I've already cleared TSA at my departure point." Eliza responded calmly, presenting her military ID. "I'm here on official family duty." "My son's funeral." Milner stared at her ID like it had personally offended him. "This looks fake. Black female general. Come on. Who'd you borrow the uniform from?" The line behind her fell silent. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, the way people do when they know they're witnessing something wrong, but don't want to be in the Facebook video. Eliza didn't flinch. "Officer, I'd like to speak to your supervisor." "You'll speak when I say you can," Milner barked. He signaled 2 other TSA agents. "We need to verify this one's story might be stolen valor." For the next 2 hours, Eliza Brooks, war veteran general and mother of a fallen officer, was forced to remove parts of her uniform, answer redundant questions, and endure the humiliation of watching Milner photograph every medal for verification. He insisted her Bronze Star was too shiny, her ID suspicious, her calm evasive. By the time her daughter Ari arrived from the parking garage, things had escalated. "Is there a problem?" Ari asked, legal briefcase in hand, tone sharp enough to shave marble. Milner turned. "You interfering." "I'm her attorney," Ari snapped, "and her daughter. What is this?" Milner put a hand on his belt. "You're 1 word away from obstruction." Eventually, they let Eliza go. No apology, no record of the incident. When she demanded a complaint form, a supervisor quietly advised her not to bother Officer Milner's. "Got friends in high places," he said, not unkindly. "These things have a way of turning around on the person filing." As they left, Ari seethed. "We need to sue." "I'll file today." Eliza shook her head. "No, we're here for Malik. That's what matters. His service, his memory." But Milner wasn't done. As the 2 women disappeared into the crowd, he lifted his phone and placed a quiet call. "She's here," he said. "Target confirmed. The foundation sends their regards." Because what Eliza had just walked into wasn't just racial profiling. It was a trap. One laid by a quiet, corrosive network of good old boys with badges. a brotherhood that called itself the Foundation. And their mission was simple: keep the military white at the top and black ambition 6 feet under. And Malik had gotten too close. He had documents, testimonies, a thumb drive hidden somewhere passed to Ari's grandfather before he deployed. He'd figured out the Foundation's obsession with rooting out unpatriotic elements, which was just code for black officers who were too competent to ignore it. And now the Foundation had noticed his mother. They say death ends a life, but not a story. Eliza Brooks didn't know it yet, but she was about to uncover the truth behind her son's death, expose a conspiracy infecting America's institutions, and bring a system to its knees armed with nothing but truth, discipline, and a spine made of tempered steel. But first she'd have to survive the funeral, and someone was already making sure that wouldn't happen. Eliza sat alone in her childhood bedroom. The floral wallpaper hadn't changed since she was 12, but the memories felt like ghosts now flickering behind every picture frame. On the desk sat an envelope marked with a name only one person in the world ever used for her, Mama B. Her father, Everett Brooks, had handed it to her earlier, his expression unreadable. This came 2 days ago, from Malik. I didn't open it. Figured it was meant for your eyes only. Inside was a USB drive wrapped in a piece of cloth from Malik's deployment uniform. That broke her knot. Tears, Eliza didn't cry. It was something colder, deeper, like a steel bar cracking inside her chest. She powered on the old laptop still sitting on the shelf, blew the dust off the keys, and plugged it in. A folder blinked to life on the screen. If anything happens. Her hands didn't shake, but her breath stalled. Inside the folder were dozens of files, scanned documents, emails, audio recordings, surveillance images, mosaic of organized rot. A pattern emerged. Black service members, harassed, fired, framed, beaten, killed. The culprits, a shadow group that called themselves the Custodians. The irony wasn't lost on Eliza Custodians. As if they were cleaning up a mess, protecting the purity of the institution. All-American apple pie fascists in uniform. Marcus had spent the last 9 months undercover documenting how black veterans returning to Houston were being systematically targeted. Not randomly, not incidentally. Systematically, their arrests skyrocketed for minor infractions. Their homes were raided under dubious warrants. They were quietly fired from public sector jobs. Their promotions in the reserves were delayed. Rescinded, buried under bureaucracy. It was a secret war, and Malik had been winning battles. One folder labeled its structure caught Eliza's eye. Personnel records, badges, meeting logs. There he was, Officer Craig Milner, the TSA goon from the airport. Another folder. High-risk assets, that's what they call people like Marcus, black officers who excelled, who questioned, who represented a threat to the old order. One audio file made her blood run cold. Captain Brooks is digging too deep. We need to move his unit, somewhere exposed. Eliza stared at the screen, not blinked, not moved. Her son wasn't killed in combat. He was deployed to die. There was a soft knock on the door. Ari peeked in, followed by a young man in a Houston PD uniform, Asian American, nervous, like he knew too much and had lived too long with it. Mom, this is Officer Theo Chow. He worked with Malik. Theo didn't waste time. Your son contacted me 6 months ago after a black Navy officer was nearly beaten to death during a traffic stop. Internal review called it resisting arrest. Malik called it what it was, attempted murder. He handed over another drive. This has audio of custodian meetings, names, tactics. Some are cops, some are in city offices, and some have Pentagon connections. Theo paused. Ma'am, if you go forward with this, they will come for you, the same way they came for Malik. Eliza looked at her son's photo on the dresser, smiling, confident, alive. Then let them, she said, because they're about to find out I'm not the grieving mother they were hoping for. In that moment, General Eliza Brooks was back. Not the woman who just lost her son, but the soldier who had nothing left to lose. If Officer Milner was the flame, then the custodians were the wildfire. Eliza Brooks had seen her share of classified threats. She'd commanded special operations in conflict zones and stood across from men who claimed God gave them the right to erase entire communities. But what she found on Malik's USB made those enemies look like amateurs, the custodians. Not a nickname, but an actual title, self-given, of course. An organized shadow group embedded in law enforcement judiciary circuits and military liaisons. Their mission not to serve and protect unless you're white male, and preferably holding a golf club. Every organization has its boogeyman. The custodians were the boogeymen who wrote the employee handbook. Names appeared on the files. Officers, prosecutors, judges, even a handful of high-ranking Pentagon advisors. But one name stood out above the rest. Senator Roger Ellison. Roger tradition first, Ellison. The man who began every speech with a Bible quote and ended with a check from the police union. His voter base adored his strong stance on order and his reluctance to acknowledge the existence of racism unless someone spray-painted it on his car. According to Malik's notes, Ellison was more than a supporter. He was the architect. Malik had traced back funding internal memos in private communications, linking Ellison to the early infrastructure of the custodians, a network born out of post-9/11 security expansions and twisted into a tool for suppressing minority advancement within the military and beyond. They called themselves Custodians of American Values. Translation: we like 1954. Can we go back? The deeper Eliza dug, the colder the air in her childhood room became. The USB wasn't just files. It was a war dossier, a compilation of stories, whistleblower testimonies, anonymous tip-offs, black military officers pulled over, searched mysteriously, reassigned veterans denied promotions, or suddenly facing misconduct charges after spotless decades. And then came the heat map. Red dots all over the country, each representing an incident connected to the custodians' activities. From Houston to D.C., Atlanta to San Diego. Not just a Southern problem, a national infection. Malik had only scratched the surface, but he was getting close. Too close. Eliza sat in silence. The computer screen's blue glow flickered off her medals on the shelf. She wasn't just looking at a conspiracy. She was staring into the face of an American disease that wore uniforms and smiled in photo ops. Her son had died not just in combat, but in resistance. One video stood out. Malik speaking directly to the camera. If this footage gets to you, it means I found something they didn't want me to. It means you need to finish what I couldn't. The custodians are not a theory. They're organized, funded, protected. And if you serve while black, you're not just a soldier to them. You're a problem to be handled. Eliza closed the file. Her military instincts kicked in. Secure the intel. Establish a plan. Identify allies. But this wasn't just war. This was personal. And the enemy wasn't on a distant battlefield. He was shaking hands with governors and sitting on armed services committees. As she stood from her chair, one truth settled in her bones. The badge was supposed to mean safety, but behind it, ghosts were hiding. And Eliza Brooks, she was about to go ghost hunting. Lieutenant General Eliza Brooks stepped off the plane at George Bush Intercontinental Airport with a stillness only years of military training could craft. Her grief, though suffocating, was buried deep under decades of discipline. The death of her son, Captain Malik Brooks, had not broken her posture, not yet. Wearing full dress uniform, her medals glinting beneath fluorescent lights, she walked toward the baggage claim. Fellow travelers stole glances, some nodded in respect. One child whispered to his father, "Is she famous?" She should be, Eliza thought. Not for the medals, but for surviving this country's love-hate affair with people who look like her in uniform. She had almost cleared the terminal when she heard it. "Ma'am, step aside. Random screening. Officer Gerald Pike, Houston Airport Security, mid-40s, square jaw, and the kind of smile that suggests he never quite grew out of high school hustling, stood blocking her path. Behind him, two more officers, all white, all silent. "I've already passed security in D.C., Eliza said, calmly presenting her military ID. "I'm here on official bereavement leave." Pike examined the ID as though it were a forged check, a black female general. "That's a new one," he muttered loud enough for a nearby couple to flinch. "Mind stepping over here? Gotta verify this isn't Halloween come early." Eliza complied, because she always complied. Because black soldiers didn't survive this long in the Army without knowing when not to make waves, but inside something cracked. 2 hours. 2 hours of pat-downs, rifling through her belongings, unfolding every article of her uniform, and questioning the authenticity of her rank. "Where'd you buy this uniform, ma'am, online?" Pike grinned like he'd just landed a joke. No one laughed except maybe the other two officers who pretended not to hear. It was only when Eliza's daughter Dara arrived, heels clicking, legal pad in hand, blazer sharp enough to cut through concrete, that the tone shifted. I'm attorney Dara Brooks, and unless you're arresting my mother, I'm filing a formal complaint for racial profiling and harassment under federal code. Pike's smile faded. We were just following protocol, ma'am. Funny, Dara replied, snapping a photo of his badge. This protocol only seems to happen to people with more melanin. They let Eliza go. No apology, no eye contact. Just the quiet hum of a system too comfortable in its own rot. As they exited the terminal, Dara fumed. You should let me go scorched earth on them. Mom press charges, call the press. And what? Eliza interrupted gently. Add another target to our backs. Not today. What they didn't know was Pike had already made a phone call from a burner cell, one line. One code, the Eagle has landed. On the other end, a voice Eliza would one day hear in a federal courtroom. Understood, make sure she doesn't leave the state. Because in this story, Officer Pike wasn't just a racist jerk with a badge. He was a foot soldier, one of many. One of the custodians. And Eliza Brooks had just stepped into their crosshairs. The airport incident was never logged officially. Security footage mysteriously cut out during the inspection. The complaint Dara filed vanished into a digital black hole, as if nothing ever happened, but something had something Eliza couldn't yet name, but could feel vibrating just beneath the surface. A storm she knew all too well. And unlike the polite harassment of an airport check, the next move wouldn't come with warnings. It would come with bullets and funerals and flags folded too soon. The morning sun rose like nothing was wrong. Birds chirped, the air was crisp, and Jefferson National Cemetery looked like a place made for honoring heroes. But beneath the manicured grass and marble stones, something darker stirred. Eliza Brooks stepped out of the black sedan with a metal-covered uniform and eyes that had seen wars and grief and still didn't blink. Today was about honoring her son, Captain Malik Brooks, a man who gave everything. But not everyone came to pay respects. 20 uniformed officers, handpicked and stationed at key points around the cemetery, were not just there for security. They were custodians, every one of them. The plan wasn't to ensure safety, it was to humiliate, divide silence. The moment the first mourners arrived, the script began. White attendees were waved through the checkpoints with a smile and a nod. Black mourners, bag checks, ID checks, full pat-downs, all under the pretense of random screening. Malik's old unit, brothers in arms from overseas deployments, were delayed for over 30 minutes while their uniforms were questioned. One officer even had the gall to say, "You people have a habit of using uniforms to hide things." No one laughed. Eliza stood by the burial site, her back straight, her jaw set like stone. She saw it all. The subtle seating arrangements, the barricades that kept Malik's friends far from the casket. The hush among the white attendees who said nothing did nothing. Not even when Officer Pike, with his smug smirk and ever-present earpiece, circled the perimeter like a man hunting for trouble. The ceremony began late because mourning while black apparently requires extra paperwork. As the chaplain read the words of service, Eliza kept her eyes on the rows of officers lining the grass. She knew what they were, wolves in pressed blues. They stood with crossed arms and dead eyes, their presence a taunt. One particularly bold custodian muttered, just loud enough for Eliza to hear, "Bet she cries, tough ones always do." Eliza didn't flinch. Midway through the flag presentation, the custodians made their move. Officer Pike approached the casket, pretending to check something on his radio. He leaned in and whispered to the honor guard, "Protocol change. Fold the flag and step back. We'll handle the handoff." The guard hesitated. Pike showed a badge, not his ID, just the badge. In moments, he had the folded flag in his hand and turned toward Eliza. He didn't offer it with honor. He tossed it. The silence cracked. Eliza caught the flag midair. Her expression unchanged, but her grip tightened with fury. Pike smirked. The crowd gasped. Dara, standing nearby, took out her phone, so did dozens of others. Then came the line that broke the air. "Guess not even death makes your kind look dignified." Gasps, phones up, cameras rolling. The custodians stood still, but their smiles faded. They hadn't expected resistance. Not here, not now. Eliza stepped forward, holding the flag tight against her chest. She said nothing. Her silence was louder than any scream. The chaplain tried to regain control. The guests looked around confused, some visibly shaken. Malik's unit began to close ranks, quietly stepping toward the front. And Officer Pike, he just stood there, still grinning, until the ground shifted. From the far end of the cemetery came the low growl of engines, black SUVs, tinted windows. A flag on the dash-out stepped FBI agents led by Special Agent Donovan Fields, who moved with the confidence of someone about to ruin someone else's week. He walked straight to Eliza and nodded, then turned to Pike. Officer Pike, your presence is no longer required. You and your team can leave. Now, Pike hesitated. We're handling security. Fields raised a hand. We're handling it. Now your detail has been relieved. For the first time, Pike looked unsure. He scanned the other custodians, but no one moved, no one backed him. Eliza finally spoke. Let them stay. Everyone turned. Her voice was calm, precise. Let them watch what dignity looks like. Agent Fields nodded. The ceremony resumed. The honor guard, properly instructed, stepped forward again and offered a second flag, this one untainted, to Eliza. The national anthem played. The rifles fired a salute, and the custodians, they watched silent, exposed. And for the first time unsure of who held the real power on that field of stone and sacrifice, the Texas sun blazed down over Jefferson Memorial Cemetery, but no heat could compete with the searing tension that gripped the mourners. Rows of white marble markers stood solemn and still, bearing witness to a ceremony meant to honor Captain Malik Brooks. Instead, the funeral was spiraling into something far more sinister. Lieutenant General Eliza Brooks stood tall in full-dress uniform beside her son's casket, the ceremonial folded flag barely resting in her gloved hands. Her grief was armored behind decades of discipline and poise. She had buried friends, she had buried soldiers, but no war zone had prepared her for what she was about to face on American soil. As the honor guard saluted and the last notes of taps faded into the wind, Officer Pike moved out of uniform protocol, out of line and fully unhinged. He stormed forward, past the honor guard, past the stunned family members. The funeral hush broke into murmurs and camera clicks. Pike, eyes bloodshot and voice thick with loathing, drew his sidearm and leveled it directly at Eliza's temple. You think you're somebody. You think that uniform makes you more than just another uppity Negro, he snarled, finger tightening on the trigger. The air thickened. You could hear the shift in every breath. 20 custodian-aligned officers stood around the perimeter. Not one moved. They watched like spectators at a rigged coliseum. No one screamed. It was too surreal. Dara Brooks, Eliza's daughter and civil rights attorney, stepped forward, trembling with fury. Officer Pike, put the gun down. You are committing a federal offense. Every camera here is on you. Pike didn't blink. He sneered at her, then shifted his eyes back to Eliza. This is your place in the dirt, next to the boy who thought he could expose us. Then a shot rang out. Eliza didn't fall. Officer Pike jerked sideways, the bullet tearing through his shoulder. He crumpled the gun, flying from his hand. Standing behind him was Special Agent Donovan Fields from the FBI's Civil Rights Division, gun still smoking, weapon discharged, suspect neutralized, medical requested. All custodian units disarmed immediately. Chaos erupted, but not the kind the custodians had planned. The crowd surged forward. Phones raised gasps, mixing with shouted orders. Military veterans stepped between officers and civilians. Dara rushed to her mother. Eliza remained upright, flag still in hand, staring down at Pike as medics descended. Her voice finally broke through the clamor. You think your hate makes you powerful. You're wrong. You're weak. That badge doesn't make you right. As Pike was carried away, moaning in pain and bleeding irony onto sacred ground, the 20 custodian officers were quickly surrounded by federal agents. Some reluctant, others stoic. The weight of decades of unchecked power had cracked under the weight of a single televised act of violence in Eliza. She hadn't needed to move. She hadn't needed to retaliate. All she had to do was stand her ground. The flag, now a little stained with Pike's blood, remained in her grip. For the first time since her son's death, Eliza allowed herself a small breath of victory, but she knew the war was just beginning. Because if a cop could aim a gun at a general on live television and expect applause, the system was more broken than anyone feared. What the custodians didn't count on was the strength of a mother in uniform, the power of a camera lens, and the simple truth: America was watching. And this time America had receipts. The moment the gunshot rang out, chaos clamped down on Jefferson Memorial Cemetery like a trap. Owen knew where the sound came from, but Officer Pike seized the moment. In one swift, brutish motion, he tackled General Eliza Brooks to the ground. Her back hit the wet earth, and her dress uniform, still adorned with decades of earned medals and respect, was pressed into the mud like it meant nothing. The ceremonial flag, the one meant to honor her fallen son, slipped from her grasp and landed squarely in a puddle of dirt. The white stars stained brown. Her fingers trembling, reached for it, but Pike's knee landed on her spine first. "You're under arrest," he barked loud enough for the cameras. "For what?" her daughter Dara screamed, shoving through the stunned crowd. "Attempted assault on an officer and inciting a riot," Pike replied, slapping cuffs on Eliza's wrist with theatrical aggression. There it was. Not a ceremony, a stage. The 20 officers surrounding the service stood in eerie silence, forming a perimeter. Not one moved to intervene, the mourners especially. Black veterans and family members were being shouted down and herded back behind makeshift barricades. The custodians were running the show, and they had just made their opening act. Eliza didn't resist. She didn't scream. She didn't give them the satisfaction. Her eyes locked with Dara's. A calm message passed between mother and daughter. Document everything. Phones were already rolling. A war hero being handcuffed at her own son's funeral. It was too much even for the most cynical onlookers. People cried out, some cursed, others prayed. Veterans saluted, unsure whether it was for Malik or the woman being dragged to her feet. Cameras flashed. The national news had their lead story for the next week. The custodians didn't care. This was the point: to humiliate, to make a message out of Eliza. This is what happens when a black woman climbs too high, dares to lead, dares to speak, Pike whispered as he shoved her toward the cruiser. You should have stayed invisible. But the world had already seen her as the cruiser pulled away. Eliza looked back at the folded flag still soaking in the mud, still unclaimed. Not a single officer moved to retrieve it. This wasn't just an arrest, it was a hijacking of honor, dignity, and grief, and the country was watching. 24 hours after Eliza Brooks was wrestled to the ground and handcuffed beside her son's grave, the first cell phone videos hit the internet. Within hours, the story wasn't just local, it was viral. The hashtags #OurJustice for Eliza and #Flag in the mud surged across platforms. Millions watched a decorated black general in full uniform, face down in cemetery soil, flanked by armed police, who should have been offering a salute, not shackles. TikTok edits replayed the moment Officer Pike raised his weapon to her head. Instagram pages that once hosted dance routines and pet videos were now echo chambers of outrage. Twitter became a courtroom, and the verdict was clear. America had questions. News anchors, previously cautious with words like racism, now used it without hesitation. Overnight, Eliza Brooks went from a quiet military hero to a reluctant icon of systemic injustice. Protesters began showing up at police precincts. Veterans groups released joint statements condemning the treatment of one of their own high school civics teachers, used the clip in class to explain the First and 14th Amendments. But while the public turned Eliza into a symbol of truth, the system didn't blink, it pivoted. Almost immediately, a new narrative slithered into the headlines. Anonymous sources within military command expressed concern about Eliza's emotional stability. Old incident reports, never serious enough to impact her career, were leaked, stripped of context, and served as scandalous revelation. She'd had counseling after a combat mission in 2004. One cable pundit claimed as if grief counseling was a crime. Another segment questioned her decision-making in a 2011 deployment based on a redacted report that had long since been closed. The phrase "under investigation" was thrown around without follow-up. Suddenly, the general wasn't a victim, she was a question mark. Even her son's record wasn't spared. Captain Malik Brooks, whose death had initially been the mourned center of the story, was now portrayed by some media outlets as reckless, overzealous, impossibly targeted for internal reasons. None of it held water, but smears rarely need facts, just airtime. And airtime they had. One pundit labeled the event at the cemetery as an unfortunate misunderstanding. Another claimed Eliza may have escalated the situation with her tone. Meanwhile, police unions released statements about respecting due process and letting the facts come out. On the other side, however, the internet was not retreating. Independent journalists began connecting dots. The name "the custodians" was whispered in comment. Threads then shouted in exposés. More veterans came forward, telling eerily similar stories of surveillance, harassment, and intimidation. One even posted a photo of his deployment orders altered at the last minute, signed by someone tied to the same department that employed Officer Pike's civil rights attorneys launched crowd-funded investigations. FOI requests overwhelmed municipal servers, and most damning of all, the footage was undeniable. No matter how many mental health concerns they tried to throw at Eliza, no one could unsee a general getting handcuffed for picking up her son's flag. Even comedians took aim. Late-night hosts cracked jokes about Texas justice with biting sarcasm. Turns out honorably serving your country only protects you until you show up to your son's funeral while black, one said to thunderous applause. As the digital war escalated, so did real-world pressure. Senators were asked about Eliza on Capitol Hill. The president was forced to comment public trust dipped, and for the first time in a long while, the system began to sweat. But it wasn't retreating, it was reloading. While the system scrambled to reframe Eliza as unstable, a few, within that very machine, were quietly choosing a different path. Not everyone wearing a badge or carrying clearance was ready to look the other way. Some had seen enough. Some knew too much, and two of them were ready to talk. Officer Benjamin Chen wasn't a high-ranking official. He didn't have a corner office or a media-ready face, but what he did have was access and a conscience. An Asian-American cop with 8 years in the Houston PD, Chen, had started to notice patterns long before Malik Brooks died in that desert. He had been quietly collecting internal memos, body cam footage, and chat logs for months. At first, it was just for himself. Now it was for Eliza. He reached out through encrypted apps and burner phones. When he finally met with Dara Brooks in the back room of a Vietnamese diner, he wasn't calm. He was terrified. They're everywhere, he said, hands trembling around his coffee. They call themselves the custodians. You're not paranoid, they're real, and they've been watching her for years. Chen handed over a flash drive. Internal messages. Assignments. Officers flagged for ideological incompatibility. Your brother, he was marked. They buried it under layers of procedure. But it's there. The files on that drive were a bomb with a progress bar. Dara didn't cry, didn't flinch. She nodded once and said, "We need a second voice." Enter Special Agent Sean Carter. Carter worked for the FBI, and unlike the chain-smoking agents of noir fiction, he didn't wear trench coats or whisper about conspiracies, but he did have questions about Houston PD's internal affairs, and he did have his own red flags about Officer Pike and the web around him. Carter had been pulled into an unrelated corruption case when Eliza's name popped up. That's when everything clicked. With Chen's data and Carter's federal reach, a picture began to form. The custodians weren't just a loose collection of bad cops. They were a decentralized order spread across precincts, courtrooms, and military liaisons. Their methods were subtle reassigned employments, missing paperwork, repeated traffic stops, but their motive was as old as American soil: keep power, where it's always been. At the top of that tangled pyramid sat a name that had been bouncing around the background for weeks: Senator Roger Ellison. 68, silver-haired and perpetually photographed in front of an American flag, Ellison had built his entire career on traditional values. That was his code. It turned out it was the custodian's code, too. Ellison had once been Houston's police commissioner before trading his uniform for a suit and a Senate seat. The custodians, they were his legacy, his network, his idea. The files from Chen and Carter revealed Ellison had personally lobbied military officials to redirect Malik's final deployment. Not because of strategy, because Malik had gotten too close to identifying senior custodian members embedded in Pentagon liaison offices. Carter's voice was ice when he called Eliza for a secured meeting. "This goes deeper than just Texas," he said. "You've become a symbol, and now they're trying to erase the person beneath the symbol." Eliza had been through 3 wars. Buried soldiers led battalions, but as she sat listening to a federal agent describe how her son's orders had likely been tampered with by a sitting senator, her hand still reflexively reached for the service stripes on her uniform. It hit differently. "They're going to try to break me," she said flatly. Carter replied, "They already tried, and now they're afraid you'll speak." Meanwhile, online sleuths fueled by digital rage and Reddit threads were digging deeper. A former city clerk posted redacted emails connecting Ellison's staff to reassignment requests in the state's Veterans Affairs Office. A whistleblower from the Texas National Guard leaked training materials that included thinly veiled profiling indicators. The dots weren't just connecting, they were forming a roadmap, but time was running out. The Department of Defense had quietly opened a review of Eliza's record, citing concerns raised in the press. Her security clearance was under review, and leaks from unnamed officials questioned her ability to lead in a politically charged climate. In other words, the machine was revving up. But this time she wasn't alone. Chen agreed to testify under whistleblower protections. Carter began drafting a brief to present to the DOJ. Dara and a growing team of civil rights lawyers started preparing preemptive lawsuits. What was once a funeral gone wrong was now the ignition point of a national reckoning. And still one question loomed: who else was involved, and how high did this go? The rain tapped lightly against the tinted windows of Houston Police Headquarters as Eliza Brooks stepped out of the black SUV. Her uniform was flawless, but she walked like a woman exhausted, not just from war, but from fighting ghosts no one else dared to name. She was exactly what she needed to be today, underestimated. Inside, Chief Raymond Daniels waited, leaning back in his leather chair, with the smugness of a man who thought he still held the cards. He was in his late 50s, fit for someone who hadn't seen a treadmill since the Bush administration, and wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. To the public, he was the moderate face of law enforcement reform. To those who knew better, he was the velvet glove on the iron fist of the custodians, General Brooks. He said, gesturing for her to sit, "Glad you decided to be reasonable." She offered a tight smile. "I'm not here for war, Chief. I'm just tired. I want this to go away before it eats us both." Behind her calm voice, a pinhole mic nestled in the collar of her uniform. Beneath the conference table, a camera hidden in her briefcase silently recorded every flicker of Chief Daniels' smirk. For the first few minutes, the conversation was harmless. Tea was offered, declined, condolences repeated without sincerity. Then Eliza steered the topic toward Malik. "My son wasn't reckless," she said, voice steady. "He was marked." Daniels didn't blink. "Marked, General. Let's not wander into conspiracy theories. Malik Brooks was a brave soldier who—" "He was investigating you," she cut in. A pause, the air changed. "I know about the blacklist," she added. "The deployment records, the custodial notes on ideological threats. I know about Senator Ellison." Daniels let out a low, humorless laugh. "You don't know half of what you think you do." "Then tell me," she said softly. "Help me understand, just between us. No cameras, no statements. I need to know why my son died." The bait was set. Daniels leaned forward, voice dropping into something meant to sound fatherly. "Let me explain how the world works. General, you see an attack. I see a recalibration. This country runs on order, and sometimes order needs to be protected from inside." He poured himself a drink, didn't offer her one. "The custodians," he continued, "it's just a name. What matters is the function. Certain officers, certain types get ambitious. They climb too fast, disrupt balance, make the good ones nervous." "By good ones," Eliza said coolly, "you mean white ones?" Daniels raised his glass. "I mean the ones who know how to keep things from falling apart." Then came the jackpot. He turned toward a filing cabinet behind him, pulled out a thick folder, and flipped it open on the table. "Your son found this." He shouldn't have. Inside were deployment memos with names, dates, annotations. Officers flagged as unstable or unsuitable for command with asterisks next to nearly every black or brown name. Another document listed recommended career curtailments with suggested rotations to war zones or hostile assignments. Malik's name was highlighted. Daniels glanced at the camera-less room and made his final mistake. "You were never supposed to see this, but you played the uniform card, and now everything's out in the open." "Who ordered Malik's reassignment?" she asked. "Let's just say I didn't write the order, but I had a pen in the room." And Ellison Daniels shrugged. "He's old school, believes in the chain of command, and sometimes breaking a few links." He sipped his drink. "But you're different. You're not chasing lawsuits or headlines." "I admire that. That's why I'm offering you a solution." Eliza raised an eyebrow. "Disappear, retire. Let the country move on. We'll reevaluate your record, restore some dignity, even fund a memorial for Malik. You walk away, we all win." She stood slowly, picked up her briefcase, and smiled. "I'll think about it." As she walked out, she nodded once to the waiting SUV. Inside sat Agent Carter, headphones on, eyes wide. "You got it all?" she asked. He swallowed. "Every word," Dara called, 10 minutes later. "We have enough to indict Daniels, and Ellison's name is all over those memos. Mom, this could bring the whole thing down. Outside the precinct, the rain had stopped. The clouds hadn't cleared, but they were thinning. Eliza didn't sleep the night before the press conference. She didn't need to. Years of military service had trained her for moments like this when adrenaline did the work. Sleep couldn't. In front of her, laid out across the war room table at the temporary FBI field office, were printouts, USB drives, signed affidavits, and a flash drive with a sticker that simply read M. The drive had been buried inside a false bottom of Malik's deployment trunk, discovered only after a tip from Officer Chen. On it, recordings, encrypted files, and one audio clip that turned whispers into headlines. Now it was time at 90 sure a.m. Federal agents simultaneously raided 14 properties across Texas. Houston's police chief Raymond Daniels was pulled from his breakfast table. Judge Pamela Hart, who'd buried discrimination complaints for decades, was escorted out of chambers in her robe. Several city officials, all with ties to the custodians, were rounded up before they could make phone calls. But the real stage was set in Washington. Senator Roger Ellison, architect of traditional values and defender of law and order, sat behind a long mahogany table at a Senate subcommittee hearing, posturing about national unity, until the screens behind him flickered to life. I believe in a strong military, he was saying, but we must ensure loyalty. Then his voice, grainy but unmistakable. Move that captain to the front. If he's poking where he shouldn't, let the desert sort it out. Make sure the paperwork's clean. We don't need any more headlines about dead heroes with agendas. Ellison froze. The hearing room, packed with journalists and staffers, went dead silent. You want to preserve the chain of command. Sometimes a few links go missing. That's patriotism. Senator Ellison blinked rapidly, then scoffed. Deepfake, he muttered. But the recording was corroborated, matched against Malik's service logs, email timestamps, phone metadata, chain of custody, airtight. Ellison's denial cracked within hours. By the next morning, the Department of Justice had opened a formal investigation into the custodians as a domestic extremist group. The charges: conspiracy, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and perhaps most damning, negligent homicide. Eliza watched the chaos unfold, not from a war room or courtroom, but her front porch and Houston tea in hand, wrapped in her son's blanket. Agent Sean Carter called her that evening. It's over, he said. No, she replied, it's beginning. Veterans from across the country started speaking out. Archived cases were reopened. A new bill drafted by Dara and co-sponsored by members of both parties aimed to federally protect whistleblowers in uniform and penalize systemic discrimination in deployments. They called it the Malik Act, and Eliza, she was promoted again. 4 stars now adorned her shoulder, but it wasn't the rank she cared about. It was the flag. Malik's flag, framed, cleaned, and finally out of the mud. Justice hadn't come easy. It never does, but it had come. The flashbulbs snapped, reporters jostled for angles. Behind the podium, 4 stars gleamed on Eliza Brooks' shoulder, her uniform crisp, her spine straighter than ever. But it was her voice, low and deliberate, that silenced a nation. My son, Captain Malik Brooks, gave his life for this country, she began. But the one who orchestrated his death didn't speak a foreign language. He didn't carry a different flag. He wore a badge. He sat in a Senate chamber. He signed orders. And he smiled while doing it. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but Eliza didn't blink. This was not war. This was betrayal. She didn't speak in metaphors. She didn't need to. Her pain was plain, her fury cold. Each word was a scalpel slicing through the nation's comfort zone. Malik wasn't a threat. He wasn't unstable. He wasn't confused. He was right. He uncovered something this country would rather deny than dismantle. And for that, they made sure his flag ended up in the mud. The crowd stood motionless in live streams across the country. Millions watched. Some with tears, some with clenched jaws, some with guilt. My son died because a system full of cowards couldn't stand the idea of a black man in uniform with a voice. They feared him more than they feared our enemies, and that fear killed him. She paused, letting silence do its job, and yet I'm still here, standing serving. Not because I forgive them, but because I won't let them win. A reporter shouted, General Brooks, what do you want now? Eliza turned slowly to the crowd of cameras and microphones. I want accountability. Not just for my son, for every service member who came home and found their own country waiting to destroy them. I want this nation to decide who are the real patriots, the ones who wear the uniform, or the ones who use it as a shield for hate. Applause broke out, not polite, not political, but raw, angry, unified. Later that day, newspapers would call it the speech that cracked the mirror. Late-night shows would quote, generals would cite it in training seminars, students would memorize it in civic classes, and somewhere quietly in homes like the one Eliza left behind, other mothers would listen and whisper. She spoke for us. This wasn't just a mother's grief, it was a reckoning. The spring sun bathed Arlington National Cemetery in gold as a quiet procession moved past the rows of white marble stones. Military precision marked every step. The honor guard carried Captain Malik Brooks's flag-draped casket with the solemnity of a nation trying to say we're sorry. This time no one blocked the path. No one questioned Eliza's rank. No one dared. General Eliza Brooks, freshly reinstated and newly promoted, stood still as the 21-gun salute cracked the air like judgment. Her uniform bore a fifth star, now an unprecedented honor, quietly approved by a unanimous military vote. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a message. After the ceremony, Congress convened for a rare emergency session. The Malik Brooks Military Justice Act passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. It established independent oversight for service member deployment orders, created protections over whistleblowers in uniform, and made racial profiling within military and law enforcement ranks a federal offense. The bill's co-sponsor, Senator Valerie DeWitt, a Republican who had voted against every racial justice initiative in the last decade. On the Senate floor, her voice cracked as she read Eliza's words from the funeral. My son didn't die because he fought for his country. He died because he believed in it. Across the aisle, silence reigned. No one interrupted. Meanwhile, former Senator Roger Ellison, once untouchable, was booked on multiple federal charges: conspiracy, obstruction, and negligent homicide. Cameras captured his arrival at court in handcuffs. The same smug grin he once wore while ordering a young captain into danger was gone, replaced by something new: fear. The custodians, those self-appointed guardians of order, saw their fortress crumble. Over 60 members across police departments, courtrooms, and liaison offices were indicted. Some flipped immediately, their loyalty evaporating the moment the spotlight turned on them. Others tried to fight, they lost, and those who once watched silently, they were no longer silent. Veterans rallied to create the Brooks Foundation, providing legal and psychological support to service members facing institutional harassment. Officer Ben Chen now led Houston's Internal Reform Division. FBI agent Sean Carter was promoted to head a new federal task force on racial justice in uniformed services. Dara Brooks, Eliza's daughter, announced her candidacy for state attorney general. But perhaps the most powerful moment came weeks later in a classroom in Atlanta. A teacher pulled up a grainy clip of Eliza's speech, the one where she stood in front of the world and named her son's killer. Not a soldier, but a system. A student raised her hand. Will something like this happen again? The teacher paused. Maybe, she said honestly, but now more people are watching, and more people know what it looks like. And that was the legacy. Not just a funeral, not just a law, not just justice, but hope that a mother's pain could change a system, that a soldier's silence could expose a network, that a nation still wrestling with its past might one day earn the future it claims to promise. If you've made it this far, then this isn't just a story anymore. It's a reminder that justice doesn't show up on its own. It has to be demanded. That truth doesn't need to scream. It just needs to stand its ground. And sometimes a flag falling into the mud is enough to make a system bow its head. Eliza Brooks didn't need superpowers. She just needed not to back down. Malik Brooks didn't have to do anything extraordinary. He just needed to believe that he had the right to live, to serve, and to come home safe. And you don't have to be a general, a lawyer, or an FBI agent. You just have to refuse to look away when something's wrong. You just have to choose the light instead of getting comfortable in the dark. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now. If this story hit you in the heart, leave a comment. Hit like if you believe everyone deserves to be treated fairly, no matter their skin color or uniform. And don't forget to subscribe, because what you heard today, it's just one of many untold truths. We're not just telling stories, we're rewriting history.